Good evening, everyone, and welcome. And for those who are still lining up for food, I would never ask you to put your plates down. So please get some dinner, some nosh, find your way to your table, and we'll continue as I make introductions and welcome all of you to Congregation Beth Israel. I have the privilege of being the senior rabbi. My name is David Lyon. If we haven't met, I suspect that we all know each other, and we're all here for the same important reason. Tonight, Congregation Beth Israel Social Justice Committee, chaired by Lisa Stone and Dina Marks, the Adult Education Committee, and ADL Southwest Region welcome all of us to KULANU, which means all of us fighting anti-Semitism. And just by way of a word to each of you, as I encounter people every single day, or every Shabbat, or in the community, I can tell you that the conversation has shifted dramatically. Every question posed to me includes, what are we doing about anti-Semitism? What can I do about anti-Semitism? Well, I want to tell you that tonight you are doing what you can about anti-Semitism. You're here because you are preparing to do something about this problem that is troubling all of us, not only because we're Jewish, but because we care. We're Americans, we're Houstonians, we're neighbors to each other. So I'm pleased and proud that we are doing this program. Look at the size of this room tonight. All of you, almost 250 people here tonight on a Thursday evening. You should give yourselves a round of applause. KULANU, all of us making a difference. And tonight, without further ado, I want to welcome and introduce first Karen Katz-Westall. She is the 2022 ADL Southwest Regional Board Chair. Karen is a transactional energy attorney who has practiced for 42 years. She's been an ADL board member for more than 15 years, is an active member of the Civil Rights, Strategic Development, and Women's Initiative Committees, has served as Vice Chair of the Civil Rights Committee, Chair of the Recruitment Subcommittee of Governance Committee, Vice Chair and Chair-elect, as well as on the Education Equity Task Force. Karen has been a member of Temple Sinai for more than 30 years, where she has served numerous board functions, including president twice. Karen, you're amazing. Karen lives in Houston with her husband, Tommy. They have 2 adult children and 1 grandson. And she made time tonight to share her profound words and introduction for all of us so that we may begin our program in important ways to set the groundwork for a very, very meaningful program for all of us to share tonight. Karen, we welcome you and thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'd like to introduce Cheryl Drazen. Cheryl Drazen is the Vice President of ADL's Central Division. She supervises the agency's work to fight anti-Semitism and all forms of hate in the Austin, Heartland, Michigan, Midwest, Mountain States, Plain States, CRC, Southwest, and Texoma regional offices. Cheryl started at ADL as the Jean and Jerry Moore Southwest Civil Rights Council in 2013 and went on to become the regional director of the agency's Texoma office before being made a vice president. Prior to joining ADL, Cheryl was a shareholder at Gillespie, Rosen, and Watzke, a boutique labor and employment litigation law firm. On January 15th of this year, a gunman held 4 people hostage at Colleyville's Beth Israel Synagogue for 11 hours. Cheryl was there, on the ground, helping law enforcement officers in the command center and providing information and updates to ADL and the Jewish community. She is here tonight to talk about that experience, how she handled it, and what it taught her. Cheryl, thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for that introduction, for your leadership, and for your commitment to this work. Thank you, Congregation Beth Israel, who is an important KULANU program participant and for the partnership that runs so deep in this community. Rabbi Lyon, I couldn't be in this building without acknowledging Rabbi Karf, one of the original three amigos in the Coalition for Mutual Respect, a tremendous impact in our Houston community. For all of you for being here on a Thursday night, to the ADL Southwest team and our volunteer leadership who do this work every single day. ADL is the leading anti-hate organization in the world, founded in 1913 with a timeless mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. Today, ADL is doing the same thing, fighting all forms of anti-Semitism and bias, using innovation and partnerships to drive impact. A global leader in combating anti-Semitism, countering extremism, and battling bigotry wherever and whenever it happens. ADL works to protect democracy and to ensure a just and inclusive society for all. Many of you may be familiar with the Leo Frank story. Leo Frank was a New York businessman who went to Atlanta to run a pencil factory. At that time, anti-Semitism and many other isms were abundant in Atlanta, Georgia. And Mary Fagan, a young woman working in the pencil factory, was found dead, holding in her hand a check signed by Leo Frank, the managing director of the organization. Now, mind you, 1915 is well before direct deposit, and everyone in the organization would have had a paycheck signed by Leo Frank. Is that better? Sorry. And Mary Fagan was found dead, holding a check signed by Leo Frank. As the trial went on, anti-Semitism flared. In the jury selection process, questions were asked. Can you trust a Jew? Jurors answered no, and they were seated. Those jurors convicted Leo Frank of the murder of Mary Fagan, and the governor of Georgia had very few options. What he chose to do was to change the sentence. Rather than sentencing him to death, he removed Leo Frank and imprisoned him for life, moving him to the farthest place he could, Marietta, a jail in Marietta well outside of then modern Atlanta. But 2 years later, a vigilante committee of leaders in Atlanta, business leaders, civic leaders, industrial leaders, went to the jail, took Leo Frank, and hung him from the gallows, the front of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, saying, "Kill the Jew, kill the Jew, kill the Jew." Anti-Semitism, as we knew it in this community and in this country, needed attention. ADL, founded in 1913 in Chicago, had a commitment to lead on this subject when it was in the headlines and when it was not. So anti-Semitism really is the original anti-bias. It's the world's oldest form of hate. While it's always been present, its levels, its intensity, and the consequences have changed. The definition at its core is an irrational fear or hatred of Jewish people. Its origin dates back to ancient times. In ancient Greece and Rome, Jews were targeted and persecuted for their social and cultural differences. As Christianity formed, it gave rise to theological divisions and the accusations that Jews had killed Christ. During the Middle Ages, Jews became scapegoats and were blamed for a range of disasters. And though they caused less violence and abject persecution, anti-Semitic ideas have survived into the modern world. Anti-Semitism tends to be contextual, and it tends to be periodic. It typically surges in times of political or economic uncertainty, as well as in times of social rapid change. So let's talk about American anti-Semitism. I already told you, and I hope you could hear, the story of Leo Frank. That raised American Jews' anxieties about the ability or willingness of the nation's leaders to protect Jews from popular prejudice. Mob violence against Jews and other minorities increased during World War I as Americans grew more embittered towards foreign nations and expressed real panic about the possible spread of Bolshevism with which they unfairly associated with the Jewish people. The 1920s revealed and revived the KKK, which focused on Blacks, Catholics, and Jews as a perceived threat to white America and the Aryan race. The U.S. saw quotas being set for higher education, and Jews were restricted from fraternities, from clubs, from resorts, hotels, and particular neighborhoods. Immigration into the U.S. soared, and we entered World War II, and Jews were blamed for dragging the nation into an overseas conflict. Post-World War II, anti-Semitism declined measurably in the United States, both with outward criticism and increased minority relations. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council repealed the historic theme of holding Jews collectively responsible for the death of Jesus, and the civil rights movement was gaining momentum. That momentum shifted anti-Semitism to the margins of American society. As the 20th century turned into the 21st century, the extent of how far Jews had come to be accepted in the United States has to be noted. If you'll recall, an observant Jew was nominated by a major political party as a vice presidential candidate. And even 2 weeks ago, we saw a Jew be welcomed to the first SEC team. Now, this rise or the history of anti-Semitism in America follows the same historical pattern, based on 7 tropes that remain the root of anti-Semitism. And I'm going to go through them quickly, not because anyone couldn't deserve an entire evening and discussion on their own, but because they're all foundational to understanding what makes up anti-Semitism. So, in no particular order, I'll start with power, specifically the notion that Jews have too much power. Jews account for less than 2% of the global population, but anti-Semites suggest that this tiny minority is not only on quest for total control of world domination, but that they already control banks, media, and government. If you recall, the protocols of the Elders of Zion fed into the notion of an international Jewish conspiracy that wasn't so far-fetched from what people were talking about. The second common trope is the notion of disloyalty, the suggestions that Jews hold alliance only to fellow Jews and only to a uniquely Jewish agenda, which would suggest that Jews would be untrustworthy neighbors and citizens. Discussions of dual loyalty we see today, whether on college campuses when we question whether a student representative could represent the student body and also have a commitment to Israel. We see it in the halls of Congress as we ask questions, and we definitely see it in popular conversation about whether American Jews are Jewish Americans. The third trope, that of greed, a stereotype that Jews are greedy and will make themselves rich by any means. If you think of Shylock in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, you can think of caricatures, cartoons, New Yorker ads. It's a theme seen and played out time and time again. Deicide, the myth that Jews collectively murdered Jesus, is used to justify violence against Jews for centuries. Historians and major Christian leaders agree that the claim is baseless. There have been tremendous movement in this area, but it is still something that you will hear and see, that I'm doing this because a Jew killed Jesus. Another trope is the blood libel. The blood libel myth is that Jews murder non-Jews, especially non-Jewish children, in order to use their blood to perform religious rituals. While none of you came tonight for a Sunday school lesson, we should all know that Jewish religious law forbids the consumption of blood, human or animal. So this isn't at all based in truth. Medieval era suggested that it was necessary for the Passover making of Passover matzah, and there have been continual stories about the need for Jewish blood. A more modern trope is that of denial, the false position that the Holocaust, a genocide perpetrated by the German Nazi regime against European Jews between 1941 and 1945 that murdered 6 million Jews, did not happen. Now, that can range from denying the entire event to denying specific elements. There are deniers who argue the existence of the gas chambers. That's seen as part of an anti-Semitic trope. And finally, the most modern trope, that of anti-Zionism. Contemporary anti-Zionism, the delegitimization of Israel and its supporter, draws on and perpetuates anti-Semitic tropes. Now, criticism of Israel and its government is not in and of itself anti-Semitic, but anti-Zionism is an ideology predicated on the concept that says that is a willful denial of Jewish history, of Judaism, and of the Jewish people. It involves conflating religion with the policies of the Israeli government. It requires relying on tropes, conspiracy theories, and myths, and it inflicts harm upon Jews, Jewish institutions, and symbols of Judaism. So how is this playing out today? I shared that these tropes are not new. Anti-Zionism is as old as Israel. Some of these other are date back to medieval and biblical times. Look, anti-Semitism is tip of mind and top of mind and tip of tongue. Just by a show of hands, how many people have read or heard something about anti-Semitism today? Okay, keep your hand up. If you read the Houston Chronicle yesterday, how many people have read or seen something about anti-Semitism in the past week? Excellent. You can look around the room and see that this is not a topic that is being pushed to the corners or that's being avoided. Influences are, or maybe are not, speaking about it, and we're talking about how quickly people stand up and speak out to anti-Semitism. This is different than the conversation was even a decade ago. If you had invited me here even a year ago, I would have shared personal stories about anti-Semitism. I would have told you about my maternal grandfather and how he was rejected, although completely qualified, from NYU Law School based on a quota system. I would tell you how as I went through law school, his picture sat on my desk, because no matter how difficult the courses were, I knew I had an opportunity that he had wanted, and today his picture sits in my office, reminding me of how far we have come. I would have told you about how, as I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, I saw the Klan March when David Duke ran for office. I would tell you about my very own first advocacy experience when I spoke out against religious-based education in public school. And I would tell you how it was really, really hard sometimes to be Jewish publicly. And all of those stories would have been real and meaningful for me until January 15th. So let me talk about that day. It's at another congregation, Beth Israel, this one in Colleyville, Texas. Now, you might have known where Colleyville, Texas was. Most of the country did not know that right between Dallas and Fort Worth, abutting the DFW airport, was a tiny Reform congregation with less than 100 member units. The congregation had a long history with ADL. We had engaged with them in security work. They had run our Words to Action program, teaching their youth about how to respond to anti-Semitism. They held speaker series on all types of current Jewish subjects: anti-Semitism, church and state, issues about how to discuss Israel, all kinds of things. And most recently, I had seen Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker when we had gone together to visit with the superintendent at the South Lake Carroll School District. If you recall, in October of 2021, there had been a conversation about Texas's law, about what was and wasn't a divisive concept. And during a teacher and administrative forum, discussion about whether Night, the book by Elie Wiesel, should or shouldn't be allowed to stay in classrooms in South Lake Carroll. And an administrator had said, and then had the entire world saw, as news channels captured it, that maybe the Holocaust was a bit of a divisive subject, and the Texas legislature had ruled, so take it off the shelf. And as Rabbi Charlie and I sat with the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, we explained very clearly that the Holocaust is not a divisive subject, and any confusion about the Holocaust is Holocaust denial. Just like I went through the tropes with you, and Holocaust denial is anti-Semitism. So while Rabbi Charlie and I had exchanged Hanukkah greetings and texted a few times, it had been about 6 weeks since I saw him. And so Saturday morning, January 15th, I was leaving Shabbat services myself. And in my congregation, we don't use phones in the sanctuary. And as I'm walking out, the side of my bag is buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. And I get to the car, get in, and 3 or 4 calls have come in from several ADL colleagues, all of whom are connected to another colleague who is expecting a baby. I call back immediately thinking that the news is the baby is here. I'm going to be thrilled. And as soon as I heard the voice on the other end of the phone, I knew I was in for a different conversation. Immediately, I was told that services had been streamed on Facebook. The congregation, did I even know who they were? Of course, yes, I do. And that there was a hostage situation happening. Immediately, the ADL senior team connects, our Center on Extremism, and I start to head to Colleyville. Now it's snowing, and the roads are a little bit icy, and the 45-minute drive took almost an hour. And as I drive over, I was contacted by the FBI, and they asked me, would I please come to the Colleyville Middle School, which they were setting up as law enforcement headquarters. It was about a half-mile east of the congregation that I knew very, very well. As I got closer and closer, and roads are blocked, and even though I knew the back roads, it's still getting pretty difficult, not to mention the conflict with the weather. The special agent in charge assistant calls me and says, we have too many people here. Later, I learned Quantico had arrived, and that SWAT team, was coming in, and all of their equipment. Can you go to Good Shepherd Catholic Community, which was exactly a half mile to the west of the congregation? We really need someone who can coordinate there. We're keeping all of the press outside. The church still wishes they do a 5 o'clock mass on Saturday. They would still like to go forward with that, and we have the hostage families at the church. Could you go there? I didn't think there was any choice but to say yes, and I gulped. As I walked into the room, as I walked into the congregation and met with leadership, Father Higgins, who ran the church, asked me would his executive office be good enough. So in a lovely room with a huge working station, a conference table, he said, take whatever you need, Cheryl. Can we get you coffee? And as the Martin Luther King weekend, elected officials were home from Washington. People start coming in and coming in and coming in. And then I get a knock at the door that Adina Citron Walker, Rabbi Charlie's wife, would like to speak with me. Now, in my role, I have lots of opportunities to speak to lots of people. I have difficult conversations about difficult topics all the time. I can tell you this was the hardest conversation I've ever had. I had no idea what to say other than to listen. And that's what I did. We talked. She told me she was scared. She told me that their 2 daughters were being brought to be with her. And she asked me, had I heard from Charlie? In the next few hours, it was a slew of media interviews, convening Jewish community leaders, talking to national organizations, and letting law enforcement be updated as to what community needs were going to be. That evening, I was taken by motorcade to the mayor's office, where the mayor, the entire city council, and the elected officials, federal, state, and local, representing Colleyville, were present. We were briefed by Chief Miller, the chief of the Colleyville Police, and Matt DeSarna, the special agent in charge for the Dallas field office. They were with us for about 30 minutes, going through the details of what they knew at that time. There had been 4 hostages held. One was a type 1 diabetic on an insulin pump. They were able to read the pump clearly electronically and knew that he was in need of additional insulin, had been able to get him out, negotiate with the hostage there, but the other negotiations were not moving as quickly as they had hoped. But they tried to give us hope that negotiations going on was a good sign, and that it would probably be a long night. We should pick who was going to stay, who was going to go. And that there would be a press conference probably around 10 or 10:15. I was asked to stay for that, and I made my way back at that time to Good Shepherd. As I get out of the car at Good Shepherd, the shots go off. I can see from a half mile away the smoke. You can hear the SWAT team going in, but you didn't know who had been shot. Within about 5 to 10 minutes, those were really long 5 to 10 minutes, you were hearing noise on the radio that the hostages were safe, and then a call came from Governor Abbott's office to say that he had received word from the FBI and from the Department of Public Safety, and that the issue had been resolved. Move ahead with that 10:15 then press conference given by the special agent in charge and the chief of police. And as you recall, questions coming in and out, and a snippet of a response that said, there is not a pending threat against the Jewish community. Now, I was standing there, and I heard the whole set of questions that came before, and they really were about, it's late on a Saturday night, and Sunday school is going to be meeting tomorrow all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Is it okay to do that? And the special agent in charge responded very clearly that he did not have any indication that there was a pending threat against the Jewish community. Now, various reporters took pieces of that, and it came to be a week-long conversation about whether or not the FBI believed that this had been an anti-Semitic hate crime. So that week was a slew of storytelling, internally and externally with our ADL family. I did a lot of media. I wrote prolifically internally and externally. There were community events, healing services, the opportunity to go to a service that didn't have to say Mourner's Kaddish after an event like that was miraculous. To be able to be in community together was huge. Time with Rabbi Charlie, really getting to spend time with Jewish communal leadership nationally about what does this mean, about other clergy members who were worried about leading a service in their own community. And then finally, that FBI press conference where clearly they announced an anti-Semitic hate crime had happened. I'm often asked if what I experienced in Colleyville was a shock. The simple answer is no. It was disturbing, it was unsettling, and it was harrowing, but it was another data point in a trend line that suggests anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country. A temple in Austin had experienced arson in October. I knew that anti-Semitism wasn't someone else's problem. I knew that it was alive and well in Texas. 8 years before, we had experienced a tragedy at a kosher market in Paris, but that was Europe. In October 2018, we saw the largest number of Jews killed on American soil at Tree of Life Synagogue, and 6 months later, to the day, we experienced a murder in Poway, California at their Chabad. In 2019, a man was shot 6 times outside the Young Israel of Greater Miami. In October 2019, 2 Jews were attacked outside their synagogue, told to get back to Israel. Outside the Chabad house at Yale University, when a rabbi resisted 2 teens, his car was stolen right as we entered the pandemic. Since then, we've seen harm done at Hanukkah gatherings and in synagogue parking lots. We've seen Jews paintballed as they walked to Shul. In addition, our community has experienced bomb threats as so many worship services moved online. We saw Zoom bombing, a cyber attack on sacred Jewish space. In 2021, ADL had tabulated 2,717 incidents of anti-Semitism throughout the U.S. This number represents an all-time high since ADL began recording the data in 1979. This is an average, not taking Shabbat off, of 7 incidents per day. It's a 34% increase over 2020. Of the 2,717 incidents that were recorded, 1,776 were harassment. That's 43% higher than the previous year. 835 of those incidents were cases of vandalism, where property is destroyed. That's a 14% increase over 2020. And 88 incidents of anti-Semitic assault, where a person was harmed. That's a 167% increase over the previous year. All of those assaults, there were no fatalities of the 131 victims. Now, I know as Texans, people often boast everything is bigger here. 112 of those incidents occurred in the Lone Star State. We tied for fifth with Michigan. We were following New York, New Jersey, California, and Florida. What happened in Colleyville is a disturbing reminder of the need to call out and condemn anti-Semitism wherever it arises, whether it be in the form of vicious conspiracy theories about the Jewish people or inflammatory rhetoric that demonizes the Jewish state. We must stomp out the hatred before it metastasizes into real-world violence. Make no mistake about it, the venue chosen on January 15th was intentional. It was not a movie theater or a pizza parlor or a shopping mall. Violence in those places is horrific. It was a Jewish house of worship on the Sabbath. Violence aimed at a congregation is anti-Semitism. We have to be leaders on this subject. We cannot politely ignore anti-Semitic tropes or dismiss them or joke to normalize them. To accept minimal coverage by the media outlets suggests that anti-Semitism isn't newsworthy. To follow leaders who do not use their voice to call out anti-Semitism is a form of hate that only emboldens them. Americans of all walks of life can help in the fight by speaking out against hate and demanding that others do the same. This means speaking up even when it's hard to do, when the hatred is being expressed by your own friends or your family members, members of your political party, maybe a coworker, or even a supervisor. We have to have the courage to speak up about hate regardless of the source. We need social media companies to do more to combat the anti-Semitism and disinformation that is coursing through people's feeds around the world and being amplified by algorithms. The government needs to step in and implement sensible regulations that require social media companies to do more, to address rampant hate online, to employ human moderators to identify and remove anti-Semitism before it can do more harm, and take other steps using the high-tech solutions that we are so fortunate to have, like artificial intelligence, to monitor networks for hate speech and anti-Semitic harassment. I thank you for the opportunity to share my story, for your commitment to fight anti-Semitism, for your willingness to be here tonight. I am so very grateful to be in the trenches with you, to be fighting hate for good. Thank you, and I would like to call my colleague Mark to the stand.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was terrific, and we really appreciate you sharing, particularly how you responded to Colleyville. Where are my panelists? Come on up. They're coming. Thank you all for being here. This is a terrific turnout. We are greatly appreciative to Rabbi Line and David Scott. I also want to thank Lisa Stone, who was overseeing tonight. Lisa, thank you, as well as Dina Marks, Margie Levin, Mary Gentry Roberts, who are all part of my staff, and team here in Houston. Thank you all so much. Please come on up. We haven't met yet, so this is... Sit anywhere. Yes. I'm Mark Tobin. I'm ADL Southwest Regional Director and oversee a region that includes Houston, and it runs all the way to El Paso and to the east, all the way to Beaumont and all points south. I've been with ADL just a little over 3 years, and I'm a proud member of Beth Israel congregation in Houston. It really is a pleasure to be here and to be working with the congregation on this important program. but the most important thing is y'all, and y'all coming to learning to understand the threat and how to respond. Cheryl explained, we're experiencing this perfect storm of rising anti-Semitism with anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories being normalized and mainstreamed, whether it's social media, celebrities, and politics and across society. All of our panelists, who I'll introduce in a second, have unfortunately been targets of anti-Semitism, and I just want to thank y'all all in advance for your strength and bravery in coming to share your stories. I first would like to introduce Eliana Antonoff. Eliana is a student at Bel Air High School, where she's a member of the International Baccalaureate Program, as well as the cheerleading team. She's also an active, I can never say this Hebrew word, madricha, rabbi. Madricha, thank you, I see emphasis. And Beth Israel's Miriam Browning Jewish Learning Center, and a committed student in Kehila High. Eliana faced anti-Semitism last year in school when she was a student at Pin Oak Middle School, and she and her father, Michael, responded effectively. Michael, I just want to say, the last time I saw you, we were both on the Beth Israel softball team, I believe, and then I think you hurt your shoulder, and then were out for the... Yeah, a bicep, right. And he was out for the season, and that was it. We couldn't play without him. Thank you for being here. It looks like you've recovered, so thank you. And Michael is a senior director of analytics at CareSet Systems and an adjunct professor at the Jones School of Business of Rice University, and he joins tonight as a parent of Eliana. Tara Leventhal-Gassett is director of admissions and development at the Schlenker School, of which my children are both graduates. Her passion has been admissions for the past 20 years, as well as helping Jewish families find the right fit for their children. Tara not only works in a private Jewish day school, she is a fifth-generation member of Congregation Beth Israel and lives in the Jewish community. She's on the panel tonight due to her entire neighborhood receiving anti-Semitic flyers in their yards. And lastly, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Peter Hotez, whose impressive CV is way too long to read. I would suggest that if y'all have the chance to pull up an article that just came out in Moment. It's a short interview with Dr. Hotez that highlights his work as an infectious disease and pediatric molecular virology and microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine. And he's co-director of Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development, among many other titles and jobs. Perhaps you have seen Dr. Hotez on the news, where he has been making numerous appearances because of his work on COVID, which I just have to say thank you. You and your team have developed a vaccine. Thank you. That the last I read has helped over 1 million people, including 750,000 of children in nations that were challenged to receive vaccines.
100 million, but who's counting? Right?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll make that correction. And it is a pleasure to have you with us tonight. And the reason is that Dr. Hotez has unfortunately faced anti-Semitic attacks and threats as he has responded not only to the COVID pandemic, but also in his previous work creating life-saving vaccines. And so let me start with you, Dr. Hotez. You've had a long history, unfortunately, that started pre-COVID. If you kind of walk through how the threats that you were receiving morphed into anti-Semitism.
Well, thanks for that, and it's wonderful to be here, and I'll just acknowledge my wife Ann is here, and my brother Larry flew down from Boston with his wife, so. Larry is the smarter, nicer brother. So I hope you have the chance to meet him. Well, it really started, it's been going on for more than 2 decades, but it's really accelerated with the pandemic. And what's interesting is there were two threads that have now converged. The thread were targets against science and scientists and targets against Jews. And with me, they get the best of both worlds, being a Jewish scientist. That has unfortunately made me stand down and working on and being a Jewish scientist making vaccines and making COVID vaccines. Well, that's the trifecta right then and there. And it started in part because Ann and I have 4 adult kids, including Rachel, has autism and intellectual disabilities. And I wrote a book a few years back called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, which debunked that false link. And that kind of made me public enemy number 1 or 2 with anti-vaccine groups. And it was pretty quickly after that that you started to see anti-Semitism, and sometimes overtly with direct threats because I'm Jewish. More often than not, early on, it was this kind of bizarre twist to it, which is that anti-vaccine activists started misappropriating the Holocaust. They would march down, and they came down to the Austin State Capitol because they knew I'm in Texas, and wearing yellow Jewish stars with the word no vax written on them. And the no vax is written to look like Hebrew letters, and basically comparing vaccines to the Holocaust, which of course at best is ridiculous, but it was offensive as hell. And basically saying that and it's very psychological the way they do this in a nefarious way, basically saying that I will be tried at Nuremberg for making vaccines and advocating for vaccines, and I'll eventually be hanged at Nuremberg as a consequence. And it was interesting early on when I said this is anti-Semitism, people say, no, it's just the opposite. I said, no, this is anti-Semitism because it's clearly designed to intimidate, and the fact that I'm Jewish is especially designed to intimidate. So that had been going on for several years, and it had been steadily increasing, and in part because the anti-vaccine groups realized I was debunking their phony assertions and interfering with their bottom line, because they were monetizing the internet, selling fake autism cures, nutritional supplements that nobody needed, and they were selling books. So if you go to the Amazon.com and look at books on vaccinations, it's all sort of fake anti-vaccine books. So they were really making quite a bit of money, and I was hurting their bottom line, and that was one of the reasons for the aggression. But then with COVID-19, it took on an even darker turn, basically, and very much like our speaker's comments tonight, basically that the COVID-19 pandemic was launched by Jews as a form of control and global domination. Lots of stuff about George Soros doing this. But of course, they needed a scientist to actually do the manipulations of the virus. So guess who that was? Yeah, that was fun. So I was the scientist that was doing the dirty work. And what's really sick and twisted is how this got quickly adopted by the highest levels of the U.S. government on the far right. So the House Freedom Caucus started holding hearings that scientists were making the virus in a laboratory, and I started getting all my grants FOIA'd. I don't know if you know what FOIA means, the Freedom of Information Act. People scouring my grants from the National Institutes of Health, looking to see if there was a smoking gun there that I'd really created the virus. And of course, they found a couple of papers where I have collaborators, because there are not that many people in the world who work on COVID, and those collaborators in turn had been co-authors on other papers with scientists from Wuhan. So therefore, that was their smoking gun, which was ridiculous. But the fact that it was sort of sanctioned now by the House Freedom Caucus, and then amplified on Fox News every night with a lot of anti-science content. Even the governor of Florida started going after me on Fox News, and which was really bizarre. I mean, why is the governor of Florida going after a medical school professor in Texas? I mean, I'd been to Florida. I took the kids to Disney World when they were young, but that was about the connection. And then it came down to making vaccines, and the two individuals that are targeted the most is myself and Albert Bourla, the chief executive officer of Pfizer, who of course is Jewish of Greek descent, and whose parents suffered a lot during the Holocaust. And in this case, it's not only for global domination, but of course profiteering, that we're profiting enormously selling vaccines. In our case, we were doing this with no patent, and providing the technology to ensure that 100 million people could be vaccinated in India and Indonesia, which, by the way, our Indonesian version, it's a vegan technology, so the Indonesians figured out with their clergy that it could be made halal. So wound up making the halal vaccine for the Muslim world. So that was kind of not something you'd think the Jewish guy would do, but it was very meaningful for that. And so the threats are pretty regularly, and a lot of anti-Semitism in it, a lot of it overt, some of it subtle. You know, the Army of Patriots is coming to hunt me down. That's the most common refrain, to which I always say to Dina Marks, who helps me and our family quite a bit, because when the threat, I mean, these people are so brazen or audacious. When they send the threat, they'll actually provide their name in the email. I mean, it's not as if they're really trying to hide it. So, Dina's extraordinary. She's got a list of people and can compare lists to actually see, if these are people well known, excuse me, well known to the ADL, well known to the ADL Southwest. So that's been extremely helpful as well. So these are dark times, and unfortunately getting worse, not getting better. And and now within Twitter, and if you've ever seen my social media feed, seems to be a lot. It's the fact that people feel so comfortable articulating anti-Semitic tropes. In the past, it was kind of hidden or covered up, or they would send you private notes. Now they're just putting it out there and letting it rip, and that's really concerning, this kind of normalization of anti-Semitism. So let me stop there. And
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. This has been a long slog and a lot of unnecessary confrontation for you as you make your way to helping making us better. By the way, if you want to ask a question, please write them down on an index card. I believe that they're at your tables. And if you have one, just raise it up, and a staff member will come and collect it and bring it up to me. So thank you in advance for that. Eliana, I'm going to start a story, and then I want you to take it from where I am, which is you are in 8th grade at Penn Oak Middle School. You're also attending Kahila High. You are in a class with Lisa Stone is leading. It's our Words to Action program, which provides students with the tools on how to combat and confront anti-Semitism. You're in class one night. You'll have a discussion. What's next?
Excuse me, sorry. Well, I hadn't encountered many other acts of anti-Semitism, so I didn't know if what I had heard was something worth speaking up about. And me and my other Jewish friends who are in the same class and had heard the same things are all in this Kahila High class together. And we felt that we had a safe space to speak about it, and we did. We told Lisa Stone, and from then on, the ADL was contacted, and they dealt with this situation.
And can you give some details? What was the issue that y'all experienced in school?
We had a teacher of German descent who had brought up the Holocaust, seemingly unnecessarily, and was speaking about her personal experiences and knowledge that she had from her family, and one specific opinion was that the Germans during the Holocaust and World War II were having it much harder than the Jews in concentration camps.
And once you had the opportunity to discuss at Key Hill High, what was the next step? Did you talk to your dad? And Michael, maybe you want to add to the story here.
Yeah, so in recalling the story that Eliana shared with me at the time, she was explaining that her family as Germans or the German people were the true victims as they had to deal with things like food rationing and changes in, supporting the German war effort and job changes, et cetera. Yeah, so when she brought that up, and it came through, heard it through Lisa that, the ADL would be interested in supporting, I had already sent an email to the principal. So Eliana mentioned several of the other kids in the class who were Jewish. A lot of the parents were expressing outrage. My approach was a little bit different. While I was very outraged and very concerned for Eliana and her friends, it was more of a pragmatic email message to the principal in regards to, listen, regardless, it's important to me as a parent that this is looked into, what the teacher actually said. But more importantly, you need to understand that all these kids, regardless of what you said, they received it this way. This is the information that they received. So if they received that as Jewish kids, how did the other non-Jewish kids receive that? And what are they going to take away from that? So it wasn't about calling for someone's job. It wasn't about punishment. It was me expressing interest to the principal of truly understanding the impact that all of that had. There's a lot of collateral damage beyond just Eliana and her friends. Even those of different religions heard the same thing, and I'd hate to think that they normalized that behavior.
And what was the response of the school administration?
Nothing. Eventually, I heard through Eliana that the teacher was removed, but nothing happened. I followed up with the principal no less than 6 times, asking for some sort of written explanation. The removal of a teacher was one step. Like I said earlier, I thought of many steps. I thought it was a hugely missed opportunity on her part as a leader of that school to continue to educate in the students. It's not just about educating the teachers and teaching them the obvious of what can and should not be said, but also dealing with the feelings of those kids on both sides of the fence. By inaction of that part. So when I was a kid, my dad, he's a retired engineer, he taught me this lesson called the normalization of deviance. And he taught it to me in the context of which it was coined, which was like the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger, right? So there was an O-ring, and it was supposed to operate with certain temperatures. Engineers kept testing these temperature ranges above the specifications and below. It kept passing. They kept testing above, they kept testing further below, kept passing. And then on launch day, the temperature was well below the specifications, but was within the range of all their past tests. So they did the launch, and we know what happened. Thinking about that, over the years, I've seen evidence in our society and culture of this normalization of deviance. So when I think about this situation and Eliana bringing that to me and the choice of action or inaction on my part, it became a very clear choice of if we don't do something now while this is in our face, we're enabling this kind of behavior. And if we enable it, we normalize it. And if we normalize it, it grows roots. And if it grows roots, it starts to spread like a cancer. And do I want to be a part of that? Or do I want to be on the other side, having a voice, taking a stand, et cetera?
And that's exactly the question that I think everyone needs to not only ask but answer. And I think both you and Eliana answered in a way that will hopefully propel us to get beyond our current situation. And want to get back to that. But first, I want to bring in Tara. Tara, first of all, thank you for all you do for Schlenker and for education. But please, what did you tell us about your experience with the flyers in your neighborhood?
Sure. It was a weekend, and I was running out to get, donuts for my boys, and noticed the entire neighborhood had these flyers on their, in their yard. And I saw a guy across the street with a trash bag, and he was yelling something to me. And at first, I was caught a little off guard, like, what is he saying? Is he, saying something derogatory toward me? What do you? And you could tell he was saying something about anti-Semitic. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't understand you. He said, the whole neighborhood has these flyers, and we're going around cleaning them up. And so he gave me, there were 3 different flyers in the neighborhood, all with obviously anti-Semitic ads regarding like the media, the companies that Jews own, having to get rid of, these people in the media who, the Jews that own the media and own these certain companies. And the bags, it was a Ziploc bag with the ad and a couple rocks in each bag. So someone had taken time to put all of these together and throw them out in the middle of the night to the entire neighborhood.
It's got to be horrific to wake up, expect to have a pretty normal morning with your children in your neighborhood, and then see that out. What did you and your neighbors do next?
I did what any 46-year-old woman would do. I called my mom. And she immediately said, I'm calling Marvin Nathan. Marvin Nathan then called me immediately, and he said, you have to reach out to Dina Marks with ADL. And so, once again, it was the weekend, and Dina Marks and I got on the phone, and she pretty much explained to me the importance of going online and putting this incident in their online incidents report. That's how they track things. That's how they're looking at data. And so I immediately went online and entered all the information. So,
thank you. And it really is so important and helpful to us, by the way, when people do report, which you can do on our website at adl.org/report incident. And it can be any form of discrimination or hate. And so thank you also for doing that. Did you have any follow-up conversations with your neighbors, and what were they thinking about this incident?
It wasn't only, I'm in a Jewish neighborhood. I'm literally right behind the J. It was concerning because not only were the Jewish residents upset, it's scary. You get angry. You feel vulnerable that someone was in the neighborhood in the middle of the night placing these things in front of your yard. But also it was the neighbors that aren't Jewish, and they were outraged as well. And I think the key thing in this whole panel tonight is you can't be silent. You have to speak up, and you have to tell someone and make an incident report with ADL, because that's the more we can talk and the more we can communicate and not be silent, the better chance we have of coming together and hopefully, overcoming this.
Well, thank you. And
By the way,
yes.
which I'll add also, something that ADL has been very helpful for me and probably you as well, is working with law enforcement. Because, who do you call when you get an anti-Semitic threat? And so, again, Dina and the ADL staff, they're well wired to HPD, Houston Police Department, but also working with our Texas Medical Center has its own police force and security at Texas Children's Hospital. They're here with me tonight, Baylor College of Medicine security. So all those things are extremely helpful as well.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And to all those who are protecting us tonight, whether with HPD or Medical Center, thank you. Thank you very much. It sounds silly, but it is a team effort for us to deal with the situation. One question from the audience is, with regard you, Dr. Hotez, did these threats impede your work, or did they cause you to alter how you worked?
Well, overtly, not so much. I mean, I kept doing what I'm doing, but no question it had an impact on my general anxiety level, and because it does mess with your head, and there's in their own cruel way, they're psychologically very sophisticated also, and so it does have an impact over time, and so no question that has, this COVID pandemic's been tough anyway. If you're trying to transfer vaccine technology to Asia, anyone who's done business with Asia knows what that means. It's 4 or 5 in the morning Zoom calls with India and Indonesia and Bangladesh, and in my case, then going to bed late at night with Don Lemon and Brian Williams and Lawrence O'Donnell, and so it's on top of the fact I didn't sleep for 3 years, and then to get all of the pretty virulent anti-Semitic attacks, your resilience is sort of down to begin with, because you're talking and dealing with such sad stuff all day. Then on top of that, I think it had an important multiplier effect on me psychologically. So I did the best I could to not let it interfere, and Anne was a rock through this whole thing. So she's
Absolutely, and what we understand is that anti-Semitism doesn't have to result, God forbid, in violence. That the impact on us individually as a community can be felt in many different ways, and we have to acknowledge that as we move forward towards confronting. Eliana, so you're a freshman, right?
Yes.
What did you take from this experience that you with 8th grade, and how is it impacting you this year as you enter high school?
Well, at first, when the incident happened, I was just a little bit in shock, and I was doubting myself that it actually happened, because I was like, there's no way someone could actually say these things and mean them. But it just brought me to a point of realization where, like, now I know there are people out there who do think these things that I don't agree with and that go against my values and my religion. And it prepared me for, now I go to school with like over 3,000 people. And I know that there must be someone out there who must think these outrageous things. But now I know what to do about it. I know who to tell, and I know how to react.
I think I speak for everyone when I say that I'm sorry that you had to learn that lesson when you did, but I am certainly grateful that you have and can carry forward and continue your life in a vibrant way that is on your terms. So thank you. And Michael, what about you? Do you see the world at all differently?
I mean, honestly, not particularly. I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh. I was the only Jewish kid in my high school. I experienced my share of stuff. I was shocked that it happened to us here. We live in a very diverse neighborhood. I was living in denial. So this shocked me back. This woke me up and prepared me, because Eliana's the oldest of we have 4 kids. So, and I don't, horrible that this happened to her, but I'm not going to let this memory fade, in regards to our other kids and the people in our network of friends and family and community, et cetera.
And Tara, what advice do you have for people who have experienced the kind of anti-Semitism that's been described, but also those that haven't?
I think my advice is that if something were to happen to you or someone you want to get in touch with ADL. Like I said, I think putting in an incident report is key. That's how they track things. That's how they get their data, and that's very important. And I think if you haven't, kudos to you, Mazel Tov. Like, it's obvious it's around and it's getting worse and worse, it seems like. And I hope it doesn't happen. I've got, my 2 boys go to Schlenker, and, I hope they don't have to experience anything like this or what Eliana experienced. So, but we have to continue the conversation and give people the tools to deal with it and to learn from these type of situations.
Dr. Hustes, what advice would you offer?
I think when this was first happening to me, you always kind of question yourself, and is this real? Is this really a threat? And maybe I'm overreacting to it. And I think the bottom line is most likely you're not. And I think it's important to have a low threshold for reaching out to someone to get advice and to contact either local law enforcement and take advantage of the resources that we have here through ADL Southwest that understands it at a very granular level. And the worst thing that can happen is you can have a conversation with someone about it at ADL. And the key, I think, is not to let this become a new normal because that's not going to be acceptable. And the Jewish community here in Houston is an old Jewish community, right? And with the Galveston movement in 1907 and before, and we have every right to be here like anybody else, and we've contributed a lot to this, a lot to the prosperity of the city and this state. And so remember, we deserve to be here.
Absolutely. I think, you talk about anti-science, and I think you basically say, that anti-science is anti-Semitism. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, it's coming from the same source. It's far-right extremism. And so, for instance, the point is if you look at this, I just wrote a paper on this for the Public Library of Science. In Texas, we lost 90,000 people to COVID. We're tied with California for the number of deaths, but California, of course, is 40 million. We have 28 million. So Texas probably is, I called it the single greatest tragedy to ever affect the history of Texas. But compounding that tragedy is the fact that of those 90,000, half of those deaths occurred after vaccines became widely and freely available on May 1st, 2021. And it's because 45,000 Texans needlessly lost their lives because they refused to take a COVID vaccine. And we dismiss this as misinformation or disinformation, or we call it the infodemic. It's none of those things. This is targeted aggression from the far right. We heard it at the CPAC conference in Dallas in July 2021, quote unquote, first they're going to vaccinate you and then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles. And as ridiculous as that sounds to us, 40,000 Texans lost their lives because they believed it and out of allegiance to this thing, refused to take a COVID vaccine. And every night this was amplified on Fox News, as documented by the media watchdog group Media Matters and a social science group at the Federal University of Technology in Zurich, which is like the MIT of Europe, documented this, that Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham filled their broadcast night after night with phony anti-vaccine content, discrediting the effectiveness and safety of vaccines. And so it's no surprise that now you have the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers marching at anti-vaccine rallies. If you look at the first arrests with the January 6th insurrection, they were prominent anti-vaccine activists. So this has become a new signature of the far right, is anti-science and anti-Semitism. And it's coming from the same source. And intuitively, it's not obvious how you would tie those two together, but that is the link through far-right extremism, and that is a new reality for us.
thank you for describing that. Eliana, switch gears a little bit, but what are you looking forward to as you continue your education? And as you look forward, are you also looking back at this incident? And is that informing your future?
I think about it a lot because I have a lot of friends who still go to that school and would have had that teacher. And I'm just thankful that they didn't have to hear the things that I heard and my peers heard. And I think I will think about that a lot throughout my life. What could have happened if that teacher was not removed from that school, and all of the minds she could have changed and the thoughts she could have provoked. But moving forward, I think now I know what to look out for, and I learned a lot from that experience, and I know a lot of people did. And not just what I can do, but I learned how I can help other people know what to do when that happens, and know how to support others when things like that happen.
Oh. Tara, what about you? I mean, do you wake up every morning and go outside and wonder what's going to be out there?
No, but I am more aware of really everything and my surroundings. When I pull up to work, I'm looking around. I just think you have to be more aware. I don't think, you want to live in fear, but you also don't want to forget. So I think it's always in the back of your mind, and it just makes me more aware.
Thank you. And we're about to go into the breakouts where y'all will be talking and learning and listening about how to respond, how to better equip yourself. But here we have diverse experiences from different perspectives. A physician working to combat a global pandemic, an 8th grader and her father, and a teacher who's going out to get donuts for her sons. Obviously, there's a lot of things that they probably have in common, but the one thing is they have experienced anti-Semitism in the last year and a half, and it is part of, it is now something that is part of our lives. But what also needs to be part of our lives is how we respond. And that's why I encourage y'all to stay for the breakouts, because there are things that you can do. And I want to thank everyone on this panel for not only sharing their experiences, but talking about how they responded, because it's within us all. And I hope that no one has to experience these kinds of actions. But if you do, know that you're not alone. Know that we are here to support you, and we will all get through this. So thank you, and now it's my pleasure to welcome Lisa Stone, who's going to take us through the breakouts.
Big thank you again to all the panelists. We really appreciate how you're sharing your unfortunate experiences with us to help all of us. And I want to thank the workshop presenters in advance, because we're not going to call them up to save time, but they have prepared a really useful set of workshops for all of us. So you have your first choice of workshop. It may happen, because we did have people show up who weren't registered, that you may get there and it may be too crowded, in which case you may be asked to go to a different session. If you still want to have your original session, you let us know. We'll get it to you in another setting. So here are the locations. Again, go to your first choice. Giddel Francis is doing How to Counsel Targets of Anti-Semitism in the Fingerboard Room. You walk out those doors, down to the hall to the right, and it's the second door on the left. It'll be pretty obvious. She'll be there for you. Dr. Chantel Henderson and Randy Sonnenschein are doing Helping K through 12 Students Recognize and Respond to Anti-Semitism. That's in the Lewis President's Room. Again, out those doors, down the hall to the right, it'll be the room after the fingerboard room. Or I may have reversed that, but you'll figure it out. Dina Marks will be staying in Wolf Tuman Hall right in here to talk about how anti-Semites are promoting old hatreds in new ways and how to respond to them. And Rabbi Kenny Weiss will be in the chapel, which is directly outside these doors, discussing how to respond to campus anti-Semitism. So please move very quickly, and then when you come back afterwards, we will hear from Rabbi Lyon, have dessert, and conclude. Thank you all very much.
With great thanks to everybody who organized this event, with more than 250 people who came and began the program with us, we can see that the amount of information, the data, the inspiration, and the motivation are very much reflected in everything that we've been hearing about, we've been seeing, and perhaps even feeling personally. So this event is an extraordinarily important time. It might be the darkest season of the year, but it's also the reason why there are Hanukkah lights, there are Christmas lights, there are Kwanzaa lights, and we try to find the light that should be flickering in the darkness. It gives us a way to find our place and the direction that we need to take. But in the interest of time, rather than going around to reflect and consider, let me offer you this, and then I'll release you for dessert. We try to sometimes distill these very challenging moments into something that we can remember. And there is something that we can remember. First of all, in our sanctuary, on one side of the bima, was Rabbi Hyman Judah Schachtel, who had the privilege to choose a very special scriptural quote that would be inscribed there. And he chose the quote from Micah, chapter 6, "Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God." And not so long ago, I wrote a blog for the congregation that emphasized that verse from Micah, but instead of focusing on justice, love, and humility, it was really the first words in each pair of Micah's expression. Because we are Jews who are a part of a religion of action. We may be intellectual, we may be thoughtful, we ask a lot of questions, we deepen our understanding through the process of questioning, but we are first a religion of action. And if we look at Micah's words, we discover do, love, and walk. And we have to do. We cannot just sit back passively, perhaps as history has recorded our actions in the past. We have to do, not because others are doing to us. In fact, we're really taught, do not do unto others as others do unto us. But rather, we have to do the right thing. Stand up for the justice, stand up for the freedom and liberty that this country has afforded our ancestors, us, and certainly we want to provide for our children and grandchildren going forward. So the first word I want you to remember tonight is do. Do something about it. The next word is love. We have to love. Now, Judaism does not teach us to turn the other cheek. I hope you know that. If I turn the other cheek, you're going to hit me again. And I don't want you to hit me again. I don't want you to hit me for the first time. But we have to take the high road and demonstrate that we are not a people who hates anybody. We are people who loves everybody. And although the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself, may be cited by Christians in the Gospels, I want to remind you that it originated in the book of Leviticus in chapter 19, verse 18. Love your neighbor as yourself is one of our golden rules. No more hate. No more indifference, no more tolerance. It must be love. Do and love. And finally, walk. You got to get out. You got to walk. And if we remember what Abraham Joshua Heschel said in the mid-century when he walked with Martin Luther King Jr., when he walked and marched, he was praying with his feet. It isn't enough to pray to God that the world should change. Jews have never been only about prayer. We say, pray as if everything depends on heaven, but do and love and walk as if everything depends on you. So let's love more than ever before, and let's walk. Let's get out and march. Let's be present and be unafraid. And although it's a lot to say to be unafraid, I think there's evidence today that between ADL, FBI, HPD, congregations, interfaith ministries, our great city of Houston, we can see that we really don't stand alone. And although the Three Amigos are an extraordinary trio, and I'm proud to be one of the Three Amigos, the truth is that the ADL's Coalition for Mutual Respect, which has been chaired by Regina Rogers for the past 25 plus years, is a cohort of interfaith clergy who do together, they love each other, and they walk together. And it's one of the reasons why, and I hope I'm not overstating it, but while we do see terrible expressions and actions of anti-Semitism in other places, Houston has been, for the most part, a rather quiet place. Yes, there are incidents, there are personal experiences, but for the most part, Houston has been, thank God, and poo-poo-poo and Kanahora, it has been a pretty good place because we really don't tolerate between faith traditions and others what other places have experienced. And I'll give you one example. There was a Muslim imam who came to Houston, the outskirts of Houston, not so long ago, who was a rabid anti-Semite. And I was approached, Rabbi Lyon, would you go speak to him? I said, no. I'm not going to go speak to him. I'm the last person he wants to see across from his desk, for me to tell him to stop doing what he's doing. But rather, I said, why don't you have fellow imams in Houston who are part of our community, who appreciate and respect each other, go tell their fellow Muslim leader, we don't do that here. We love each other. We walk together. We spend time together. And that's what they did. Now, I don't know what happened to that imam, but he hasn't bothered me. I don't think he's bothered you. And we've helped each other by drawing on strength that comes from the natural and appropriate places. But I want to urge you, you are now really ambassadors who are better prepared, better educated, and more inspired to do, to love, and to walk. So let's get it done, and let's be sure that in all the democratic ways that are our privilege in this great country of ours and our great city, to make a difference so that we and our children and grandchildren can feel safe and proud, self-respectingly Jewish, and very proudly American. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks to all our leaders. I can't name you all, but all of you who made this night possible. It's all because of you. Thank you so much. And I caution you around the pull-apart cake, because if you're here on a Friday night, I urge you to come back on a Friday night. We always have pull-apart cake. And our worship services are beautiful, not because of the rabbis or the cantor. It's the pull-apart cake at the end of services that brings everybody in. Next Friday night in our sanctuary, we will be formally installing Cantor Kenneth Feibush is our cantor, and our very special guest, Cantor Daniel Mutlu, will be joining us. And if you would like to come, please join us. Have a wonderful, safe evening and early Shabbat Shalom.